again. It's September 29th, 2023. The Recovery Task Force meeting will convene. If we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I know yesterday everybody was really busy on the anniversary, and I personally want to thank each and every one of you for your commitment to Lee County, for your commitment to obviously bringing Lee County back. I can't stress enough. I'm so grateful when the members of Bay County came down to the EOC shortly after the storm and talked about how successful they were, the things they did, and so many things they didn't do right with their task force, and really appreciate another community reaching out to us. So each and every one of you, I want to thank you, not only the task force members, but everyone that's participated on a branch. This is about our recovery. This is about us rebuilding and coming back stronger as a whole. Each part that you all represent are an essential part of Lee County, and can't stress it enough how important your recovery is. Yesterday was a very a day full of a lot of different emotions. You know, as I started off in the morning in Sanibel and then ended in Pine Island, and there's still an awful lot of devastation out there. I pray every day that we can move this as quickly as we can. I can't thank, the governor, the state, both on the Senate side, the House side, Jenna. I mean, everything that you've all done for us, it's not a question of can we do it? It's just let me look into it and it gets done. And I am eternally grateful for the type of support we've gotten in this. I think as we've evolved as a group, we realize just how important each piece is, but how important the whole is. And it's essential that we'll continue to identify the opportunities for us, the grants that may be available to us, the funding opportunities that can be available to us. And I think we continue to be surprised about the opportunities that enable us to come back stronger. It's the other thing that I'd indicate is that each and every one that will go up to Tallahassee, I think last year was certainly a lot of sympathy and compassion with new storms and new events that have taken place. People may not necessarily understand that this is a long-term project. I think it's essential that we remind people that it's a long-term recovery. It was the third costliest storm. It certainly has the potential at the pace it's going to be the most costliest storm in the history at the pace it's going. Can't stress that enough. And I know there's a lot to be grateful for. I was at the Sanibel luncheon, and Dave, you did a great job, and thanks staff for everything. But, even as a county commissioner, it just takes for granted the things you hear that get accomplished. And the fact that 11 bridges had structural damage that we had to repair in the time we did. So Sanibel was the most miraculous, but each and every bridge that we had to do, the repairs necessary. And, it was definitely the sediment around, certainly in Pine Island last night as well, how grateful each part that had that gateway to their community, just how essential it was. And I really just can't thank the legislator and the delegation just for remembering us, and certainly from Kathleen Pasadoma down to, obviously Mr. Renner on the House side, and, got to know everybody on a first name basis and appreciate that. But I think we need to just reiterate what our needs are. The urgency hasn't gone away. And I don't want anyone to feel up in Tallahassee that there's not a need here. Sometimes it gets somewhat convoluted when you hear about, we received the HUD award, and that's $1.1 billion. When you have a storm that, right now is pegged at about $117 billion worth of damage and continues to escalate, I don't know that we truly have a cost of what the impact was to our community. We have so many people that are struggling with insurances, struggling with trying to get their claims resolved. There's just so much work to do. But each part of my day yesterday was one, trying to look at and being grateful for what we've been able to accomplish. And I'm not trying to dismiss what we need to do. But honestly, it's been an unbelievable year. And I'm glad we're together as a group. I'm glad we've come together. I'm eternally grateful, and I can't say it enough, for the people that have participated, not only the task force, the branches, but the public that's been engaged at so many of our meetings, because this community is really for you all. As I've always said, I just have the privilege of representing you and hearing your voice. And I know that every committee member feels the same way. It is really your recovery. We just have the opportunity to be the advocates and certainly be involved in some policy decisions that hopefully make this community so much stronger, so much more resilient. But from the bottom of my heart, thank each and every one of you. I can't say it enough. And staff and Hagerty, Collaboratory, I can't even begin to describe the emotions I go through. This has by far been the most emotional roller coaster event I've ever been on. And, as I was talking with an old friend of mine last night, who used to be the city manager of Sanibel, I was overwhelmed with Charlie. This is a whole different hemisphere. And that was my involvement. So I just wanted to open up at those comments and, just kind of let those linger for a moment. But I appreciate every one of you. There's been a request to actually delay the minutes, as they just came out pretty late. So we'll push them to the next meeting.
Thank you.
There's certainly been a lot of reshuffling of this agenda. And I think, the most important thing that I wanted to highlight is that we didn't have an urgency or a deadline like we did with HUD on this, committee coming up with a final report. We have reflected and had a lot of conversations internally and indicate that February is probably a more realistic date of having this put together. It gives each and every representative at this table an opportunity to go back to your group. And again, the one thing that I just think that we need to keep in mind is that we're doing the best we can to make sure that we submit what we submit. Amendments are something that I just know are going to take place, whether it's in the HUD opportunity where we'll do amendments. Looking at New York, I mean, they're in the hundreds right now in amendments they've done to the HUD plan some 15 years later. So I think we're doing our best efforts, and I can't thank all the players enough for your participation. But I just wanted to indicate the conversations that went on internally, the meetings I've had, with staff, and the opportunity to give everyone a realistic time frame to come up with, our conclusions. And again, as we go through the components, there's always opportunities to continue to amend. We're always going to continue to learn as events come up. I mean, there wasn't a playbook for how do we recover from a Category 5 with property damage that looks like it'll be the highest property damage in United States history. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts. I just thought it was essential that I wanted to share with everybody the thinking, not only with the professional companies that are helping us, but staff. And conclusion was February looks like it's a more realistic date, and look forward to you going back to your appropriate councils, your bodies, and having those discussions and looking for your input. Again, I think this is a great effort that we've accomplished. But by no means is anyone up here indicating that this is concrete and in stone. We continue to learn from this. So those are my opening comments, and I thought it was appropriate for the audience to know exactly that we have some additional time, and we'll continue to do that. And I think February is a realistic date of submitting a final plan together that we at the County Commission can certainly have an opportunity to review and adopt. And I'm really curious to see just how big the plan is and what it comes to. I still have the book that the gentleman from Bay County gave me, and it seems to be a really thick, long book. So I can't imagine ours is going to be anything shorter. But I'm always grateful, and I'll give out a shout to their chairman, Robert Carroll. He's been just short of miraculous, available to me in so many questions that I've had as you do this. Again, and I can't thank them enough. And they are amazed at our recovery because it took them over 18 months just to pick up debris. So thank you all. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Harrison. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Do you have the login information? Thank you.
So good morning, and just want to reiterate that it is an honor to be working with you on this long-term recovery and resilience plan. We really do appreciate the devastating impact that this storm had on the community, and that we are 1 year from that. This effort has been underway for 7 months, roughly, and I really appreciate the commissioner's comments of characterizing the need for long-term and long-range planning. A lot of what happens in emergency response is about what can immediately be done. And we know that people obviously need immediate help. Communities need immediate help. But there's also a need to take the long view, because problems don't happen overnight, and they don't get planned for and resolved overnight either. So communities have to be able to really do both things: respond in an immediate sense, take a long-term view, and take some time to pull together community, to pull together stakeholders, to pull together decision makers, and really think about what the trajectory is for 2, 5, 10 years into the future, knowing that there are going to be other storms along the way. So with that context, we want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing with the time that the commissioner noted. We've expanded a bit. As we talked about in the last meeting, we felt it was really important to take a strategic pause to make sure that we really had our fingers on the pulse. As you know, there are about 70 initiatives or action areas that really came from community and stakeholders in this process. Action areas that we call initiatives that are really being developed as the core fundamental part of this plan. And to make sure that those initiatives are framed in the right way, it's very important, critical, that we understand what are the current investments, what are the current projects, what are the current programs that align to those areas for action, so that what we come out with is a smart next step for what the action in new investment needs to be. So you have to know where you've been to understand where you're going. And we've been working with the county on that, working with the cities and municipalities on that. And really, we took this last few weeks to really focus in on that. And we're going to talk about that and express a little bit of what the feedback was that we received. From that communication, there are also some key, I think, questions and decisions which we hope to bring before this body today. So that's the direction we're going, and that's what we've been doing over the past couple of weeks. Maybe just a little bit on the one-on-one meetings we had with the county and other stakeholders. This process features 8 areas that roughly align with FEMA's 8 recovery support functions: health, housing, economic recovery, cultural resources, natural resources, and so on. We met with county subject matter experts in each of those areas and really were able to go through the initiatives. We also did that with our one-on-ones with the RTF members and your staffs. So just really have appreciated the ability to understand and get a lot of rich feedback. And that's what we've been doing over the past few weeks. And of course, I'll turn it over to Tessa.
And also, the branches have met. We've had 2 full rounds of branch meetings. And in those meetings, they began to look at the emerging initiatives. I say emerging because there's lots of movement and information constantly coming in about those. And we provided a survey with them so that they were able to provide direct feedback and comments, revisions, suggestions as well. So the branches have also continued the work in developing the initiatives over this time.
Another document that we shared with you in the run-up to this meeting is called the Plan Outline. We wanted to begin to share and really allow you a chance to think about and see what is the product going to look like that you're holding in your hands come February. And we wanted to bring that to life a little bit. And so the outline that you have near you is kind of a first run. It's a draft run. There's plenty of time and plenty of ability to move and to take comments. But this is what we wanted to share with you, just to give you a sense of where we're going. We want to introduce the organization structure and key contents for the Lee County Hurricane Ian Long-Term Recovery and Resilience Plan. We're creating a vision for the final plan. It's subject to the changes of the development process and continuing feedback. But really, I think a big message is that this is a plan that seeks to inform the strategic level. It wants to be conversant with the community context. That's why we've been talking with you and your staffs about projects and work that you're doing that you think align to the plan. We've been talking with the county admin and you and other stakeholders to identify what those projects and specific programs approaches are. But at the same time, we're hoping to impact the strategy that would be employed over the next 5 to 10 years. It also includes upgrades to the working initiative layout, which we've shared in the past. If the initiatives are kind of the heart of the plan, we've really thought more about what is the inner working of those initiatives. And so to kind of go over that, we imagine that the initiatives, and we've shared these in draft form and sat down with you and talked to you about these initiatives, that there's an initiative description which describes the proposed high-level strategic objective, right? So if we think that there's going to be other storms and we think there are going to be new moments of investment, we would want the initiatives to really be a headline under which new work could be put after your next disaster, right? If there's a strategic objective, that strategic objective may be the same strategic objective for the next disaster you have, and you want to put new investments into that area. So this is really a framework that is a plan that should work through coming disasters as well. A section around need, which is just to say that we really want to put in context, what is the driving need for this initiative? What is the resilience and recovery value? A regional approach, which we talked about at length last time, a high-level summary of relevant current planned or proposed work that constitutes what is the region's common stake. We understand that everyone has their own community context that's very important, but there also is a common stake that we can speak to. And then lastly, on the core components, impact. We want to be able to kind of describe what is the desired end state of the work that's pointed out in this initiative.
And then also there's a set of supporting components that go along with this. For example, there has been a lot of overlap where branches have suggested the same thing or have wanted to put sort of an endorsement or a stamp of approval because something that was suggested in one branch really is helpful to other branches as well. It helps us prioritize. It helps us understand who the partners are and the potential impacts in another way. Also, the stakeholders, who are the people that would be engaged around some of these efforts or who are already engaged. Key considerations, outlining best practices and high-level recommendations for next steps. I think this is really important when it comes to that regional approach. It's not like we're starting from scratch. We do have things that are going on that we can build upon that if the right funding were in place, we could expand, scale. So it's not there. It's really important to look at both the best practices that exist outside of here, but also the things that we're already doing that we know play a key role in the long-term resilience of our region. And then finally, potential funding sources, right? That's the most important part. So what are the opportunities to look for funding and to leverage funding that we otherwise may not have been able to receive if we didn't have a plan in place saying that these were our priorities.
Yeah, and that funding piece is something that we feel is very important. As the commissioner mentioned, the amount of damage that was done to this community far exceeds any one funding stream. And so we're not just talking about any one funding stream, we're talking about all of the many monies that are available right now through other infrastructure investment acts and other federal funding streams, and aligning that to the priorities and initiatives that you've put forward, so that when you go through the plan, you'll not only be able to see what the strategic objective is and what the current investment and community work is, but are there funding streams that align to that work, that those who are doing the work in the initiative, those whose organizations do work that aligns to that initiative, could pursue those funding streams and potentially even work together to pursue those funding streams. So that's part of the value of a plan like this. So I'll stop for a moment and now really turn it and open it up to the RTF to discuss, does this seem like an approach that feels right? Are there elements that you'd like to see in the initiatives that are beyond this that you'd like to point out? But I'd like to turn it to you now just to get some feedback.
Just a quick question for you. As you know, we received this a couple of days ago. So I think for many of us who have been having some different priorities with this anniversary of Ian, it's going to take a little bit for us to look at this and really have comprehensive feedback back. My question to you is going to be, we're not reinventing the wheel. So is this something that you have taken from the other storms, like that we've been working from, and has this worked, and have you incorporated what did and didn't work in those other previous plans and made changes here, and if so, how?
That's a great question. Thank you, council member. So I think there are a couple of key elements here that were specific to this community that we raised up. We looked at over 15 different recovery plans, and we looked at how they frame their initiatives. I would say that I think a couple of unique things. This is a county with very different jurisdictions that have their own community context, and when that's the case, it's very important to understand what is the common stake. So I would say that we've done more to think about the regional approach in this plan. That every initiative needs to have a regional approach that's characterized. So that's a little bit different, but we feel like it's an innovation for this plan to really do that. Another area I'd point out is the funding sources as well as an innovation. We that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you'll look at plans and you'll see that there's a lot of great thinking and ideas, but it doesn't really tell you how that action's going to happen. It's really one of the hardest things. But we felt like we could marry the plan with some fund mapping as a way to really help, empower the initiatives in the plan and give some future direction. So that's an addition that we've had. Most of the other areas align, I think, to what you'll see in other plans. If you look at the Panama City recovery plan, that was a great, I think, inspiring template for a lot of these elements that appear.
Chair, a follow-up, if I may?
Sure.
And when we looked at the Bay County plan, I've had that for a long time as well, been able to absorb that. And Bay County is made up of several different municipalities as well. Have you further reached to those municipalities to see how that plan worked for each of the municipalities? We understand it's regional, but that region is all of us with our separate needs, our separate locations. So have they seen the benefit? And again, if there hasn't been or has been, have we incorporated the input from each of those municipalities as they're 4 years later?
I don't know that we've connected on the actual outcomes of that plan. We certainly looked at the design of it, and we've had a rigorous conversation around the work that your municipalities have put out in the form of projects and work that you've identified. And we've talked about making sure that we align those projects to the initiatives, the strategic objectives, and how to do that in an effective way while honoring and respecting that the jurisdictions are different and have their different prioritized work. And so that's where we really have kind of designed, I think it's also innovative, this idea of an appendix where we maybe are creating a situation where the cities are presenting their projects that align to the initiatives, but the cities are going to adopt or ratify or approve that list of projects. So whereas Bay County, I think, has those projects quite prominently, we're probably moving to a place where there is those projects within the plan, but they're as a supporting element that the cities themselves adopt, ratify, or approve.
Chair, one final, and then I'm finished, if you don't mind.
No.
I just want to say, and I'm glad you brought that up yourself, because I do want to say to the group, as we've just had our one-on-one, as I'm sure that you all have, and I think this is where we have learned from the other plans. You took a lot of time with us, and what the county is saying is, let's all incorporate also each municipality. So they're a part of this plan, separate but together. So we can identify what we each need in each of our municipalities or jurisdictions. And thank you for the time that you and Robbie spent with us. It was time well spent. I know we've spent almost 3 hours together, but I think that's where I think the public needs to understand that's a real difference on what you're doing here. And I think it's going to be instrumental for the success of this plan moving forward and the buy-in for all of us to have with our separate needs. So thank you very much for your time, Harrison.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
If
I was gonna, you gonna add on to Holly's comments? I was gonna go there too, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to, a little back up to Councilmember Smith. Yeah, as we all know, there's 6 very unique, different municipalities in Lee County, all having their own unique, challenging needs. And I see Section E mentions the county vision, but then under the annexes, you have the municipal project list. Is that list considered to be the plans we would like to see moving forward for our municipalities, or is that separate?
I think that the answer to that is yes. That's how we're thinking about it currently. That those are the projects that you're prioritizing and putting forward, and we're aligning those to those initiatives, strategic objectives for connectivity. But that is essentially the plan that you would ratify, adopt, or accept.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, Harrison, obviously your company worked very much in Bay County. You worked with individual cities as well, correct?
I believe so. I was not on that team.
Yeah. Well, Tanya
Yes.
made many mentions to that, talked about the different cities. So I think it's appropriate in certainly the conversations I had with her, which were many. And I gather from the storms also, you've identified even further and more funding sources that were successful. I mean, the benefit of the funding and the prior history is A, you have history from Bay County, B, Panama City and others inside there. So you bring that municipality perspective, but then more importantly, you've identified and continue to evolve the funding sources that are available. Is that an accurate statement?
It is very accurate.
Okay.
Yes. That is our approach to long-term recovery.
Thank you.
It has to be real because we've attached it to some prospective funding.
Anyone else have a question?
If you
Yes.
don't mind, Chair. Yeah, I was I was looking through the initiatives. I've been kind of following this process. It's new to me, of course. When we initially put down, our needs in the portal, and to see how this has evolved into the initiatives. One concern I have is when I was looking at the housing sections, is that there seem to be very specific things that each one of those items were trying to do. The one where the one that seems to really be creating housing seems to be very focused on developers specifically. And I know that an example like Sanibel has a housing group, and something that Fort Myers Beach would like to try to get out of this. Just want to make sure that when we're going through these initiatives, that there's not something in there that's excluding working with a municipal partner like this to develop something that would be under the control of the municipality and not strictly a developer-based housing project.
Fantastic. Yeah, we would definitely appreciate that feedback. We captured it from you right now, and we'll see how that can be integrated. Sounds like a great idea.
Thank you.
May I follow up? Bill, I think what's really important, as you all try to develop, and, I've worked with many different mayors back when I was mayor of Sanibel, talking about how important it was to have that nonprofit that Sanibel was fortunate to have, a community housing element. I think each one of yours can certainly emulate and adopt what Sanibel did, but you're going to need to see what type of nonprofit could be established to truly take on that responsibility. I could tell you, having worked with CHR, first liaison responsibility I had, and my better half certainly still sits on landlord and tenants. That's just such an important element to be able to, first and foremost, to have a separate group, look at the opportunities, look at development. So I would encourage everyone to look at Sanibel, to look at that, because I think the first step, it's to come up with a plan or a mechanism. But if you don't have that type of entity, it's hard to follow and capitalize, I think.
And I agree. And I've I've talked with people at CHR numerous times. I'm certainly I'm more of a fan of drafting off of someone with expertise than I am to creating reinventing a wheel, as you will. But then the bit of the catch-22 is if you have to have really housing to be able to have a group, and you need the group to kind of create the housing. So I would envision the municipality would create some kind of housing and then form a group, or use even maybe the same group that some other municipalities using, and then enter into a contract with them for housing. But it's a chicken and an egg thing.
I think, from my experience, and certainly Councilwoman Smith has much more relevant experience, but my experience is that, groups like CHR are working in concert with you all and many times identifying based on application needs, and they're very, very engaged. We just met with them, and they got a huge SHIP grant from us. Again, identifying those things makes things a little bit easier in that regard. But I think the CHR drives as much as the municipality. That's their focus, where we as elected officials constantly have so many other things that we look at, and not necessarily just solely focused on that, or singularly maybe on a couple of things.
And another comment that was made is the economic revitalization part of the project, because an economy like ours and like Sanibel's, it's very complex because you need housing you need transient housing, you need permanent housing for people to bring the business to the businesses so that they can thrive, and all these things have to go together. So in a lot of ways, we're trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together, and every piece is important. And I think that I'd like to just know that we have the flexibility in a program where if one of those pieces of the shell that we need to put Humpty Dumpty together is something that could fit in something, even though it may not be, we may not know what that is yet.
Yes, ma'am.
And if I could, and Bill, those are excellent points. And I think one thing that we also have to think about is the partnerships with these developers, because what we're trying to do, and for your jurisdiction and mine, certainly one of the best opportunities that we may have going forward is looking for both of us off-island opportunities. And that's probably going to be based on some of the opportunities for development in a shared area. And that development might have the opportunity for those developers to have an incentive to make sure that below market rate housing, workforce housing is incorporated in that. And we could potentially partner with that, and it would be a win-win-win for all of us. So
And-
I'm not sure how you would incorporate that, but I think there is a potential for municipality developer partnerships as well, including whatever our CHR,
Yeah.
staff as well. And I think that's a lot of things that we've been discussing already. Don't know how that's incorporated, but I think it kind of comes on to your point.
And I can appreciate the efficiency of doing something outside of our jurisdictions for something like this. Although if you measure by distance, it seems simple. If you measure by drive time during peak season, then the distance becomes very large. The other thing that's really, very important to us is that Fort Myers Beach has always been a very mixed income community. I go down to
As
the
is-
Sunset with my, the woman who cuts my hair. And you can be sitting next to millionaires and hairdressers, and everybody is they get along. But the houses that were destroyed during this were the little cottages and little ADUs where a lot of the people at the lower end of that spectrum lived. And as much as I understand, we can do more off island. Right now, we have a unique opportunity on Fort Myers Beach because there's land available that will never be available again on the beach. And if we can do a mixed income housing project that would be compatible with the LMI requirements, something like this on the island, now is a chance to do that. And now is a chance to try to stop Ian from being a major gentrifying event so we can keep the life of our community. So it's really not just about housing as set units. It's also about housing in the community that are members of the community that add to that diversity that really makes our islands unique.
Chair, just one last comment, and then I just, because I think a lot of this might be after the meeting that we could talk about. But as you know, and I've said in every meeting almost, we do have, and we have shared the ordinance of what we allow on the city of Sanibel. The only density increase that we allow for is for below market rate housing. So I've shared that. It's an opportunity for any jurisdiction which does not have that right now, to make sure that when they look at their zoning, that possibly that's an area that you want to look at if you can, because we've made sure that you can on our island. We understand the value of the land. We understand the value of making sure that we have a very mixed demographic on our island. And I think you and I are both very concerned about how that demographic might change. We want to make sure that those people that do not have the income levels that many are going to need to get on that island have the ability. So with that, I don't want to go any further. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on it, but we can certainly, I'll share it again, and it's an opportunity for everyone.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Chairman, could I
Yes.
have a comment? When I appreciate your opening comments in here, we've all been working 7 months, 8 months on this in a year since the event. And our task forces have all been working diligently on this. And I do think that with all of the branches, with all the initiatives they have, what I'm concerned about is there's been a lot of effort in here. And as we roll these up into higher level initiatives, that we don't lose contact with what the initial initiative that was submitted. So as we roll it up, and I can see where you're combining a couple initiatives together, which I think makes sense for us to be able to manage this process, because we all have individual needs and we have county needs. I don't want to lose the identity of the work that the branches have done as we roll these up, so that we can say, okay, the new roll up has a little different language, but here's what's included in that language on a subset, so that we can grasp that as we try to actually do some implementation of this. So I try to make things a little simple and understanding, so that we don't roll things up and we say, where were we? And does this really address my needs or my community's needs or the county's needs or whatever? So I just encourage you, as we do that, to not lose the work that's already been done on the identity with that. Thank you.
Good point. Any other comments?
Chair, if I may.
Sure.
I just have a comment and a question. The comment is, I'm happy to see the extension. This is a tremendous amount of information to have to digest, so very thankful for that. My question is, I also got a lot of good information and out of the one-on-ones, and now that there is an extension, is there going to be an opportunity for more one-on-ones?
I want to say I very much appreciate first the comments on housing. There are a couple of initiatives where I think your comments are directly applicable, so we'll follow up with you on that. Really think that there's some strong strategic directions that we can add that would kind of maybe address what you laid out, and definitely want to recognize RTF member McLean's comments. We are going to talk at length about the consolidation process. And then to answer you, yes, we will definitely expect to be working with you at a tactical level over the next month in particular, to make sure that the initiative language that we're crafting and upgrading reflects those things that you've been expressing to us. So we definitely expect to be working with you again, to kind of upgrade language, integrate your feedback, and make sure we have our definitions right.
Thank you. Thanks, Harrison.
Sure. So it looks like we're ready to proceed. So now we just want to spend a little bit of time to talk about the plan development process. We've extended the timeline a little bit, so it's changed a tad. What we really have wanted to do is say, okay, well, we took a strategic pause to do more, assessment and understanding of the current investments that the county has been making, and the cities have been making, and others have been making. We also want to take a moment to now upgrade the initiatives. You've seen them, the Initiative Bank in its first iteration. That's very raw. We were working with community members, we were talking with stakeholders. Not everyone involved in the process knows about every investment that's current or every program that exists. So that's a very raw approach, but we really think that we were trying to be as inclusive as possible to make sure that what was captured reflects what the community would like to see. Now we need to upgrade. We understand where things are. We need to go back to those 70 or so initiatives and make smart consolidations and upgrades to the writing. So we expect to be doing that this month. October is the time frame where we really want to focus in on that. We expect to come back in November and December and be working with you on continual upgrades. We'll go over a little bit more of the technical piece of that because I want to hone in. We're going to zoom in a little bit on that. But by January and February, we really hope to be engaging the process by which the plan would be going to the BOCC for formal adoption by the end of February. So just again, wanting to reiterate that the timeline is a little extended, and it will really give us more time to be working with you and your teams. So
Okay, so breaking that down a little bit more. So in October, we are expecting to cancel the branch meetings and instead to be working more tactically with all of you and the branch members one-on-one to get these initiatives into a place where we can finalize our branch meetings in November and collect that final feedback as a whole from the group. and to allow time for the RTF members and in your various jurisdictions to provide feedback. And then in December, we would have the revision of draft initiatives and finish the plan to move forward in January, February for adoption.
And just to bring that to life, I think the interactions we just had, right? We've had new ideas. We need to then reach out and have a tactical conversation about how does that get integrated. That's the kind of work that we're going to be doing this month. So it's not that the branch meetings being canceled means the branches won't be effectively used. We'll be interacting with the branch members and the leads tactically on the actual writing process. And we want them to have time to do that, not time spent necessarily just engaged in a table talking to each other without the content they would need. So it's really just a change of the focus there.
Chair?
Yes.
I know for the municipalities and everyone that has to answer to others, I know that I will need to be taking this back to our council. So I'm going to take what you have provided with us, have the input that you've given today. We'll take a look at it. I guess during the month of October, we will be giving feedback back, but it's certainly, we have got to each go to our municipalities and make sure that we are certainly in support of everything that's being brought forward.
Great. So maybe a couple of takeaways. The final branch recommendations on initiatives will be provided in early November. So if we succeed in our plan to upgrade these initiatives through October, we'll be going back to the branches and getting their final recommendations and reactions to those initiatives. That collectively will be what we are submitting to this body. And then at that point, stakeholders will shepherd the plan development through publication. So this is the executive body, those that are here around the table, working with county administration and others will make sure that the plan from the point at which it passes to the branches to this executive body becomes the plan that really represents, the regional approach that is desired. Jurisdictions can engage in a process to adopt or accept their included priority projects. We're going to talk more about how that's going to happen, and I think there's even a meeting scheduled with city managers and others to discuss that. But we're talking about the how and map that out. But that is what we're anticipating that will be happening at a later point in this process. And then finally, stakeholders will determine planned implementation pathways. Implementation, and I think this is something that is really important. Implementation is separate from the plan itself. So at the point at which the plan is adopted, there's going to need to be obviously a conversation about how the plan gets enacted and what are the things that need to be developed to oversee potentially any work. And that's a separate conversation that might start here, but does not end and is not finished within the culmination of the plan being published.
Harris, before you go to the next slide, can you go back to the previous slide? That October area, the two checks on the very top there, is that a combined meeting or are those separate meetings?
Well, we actually think those aren't meetings. We think those are reaching out to your staff. And when I say tactical, I just mean question, answer. We'll have questions where we need to touch base with you on issues that you've identified as a priority or areas where in the past, maybe you've submitted projects and we want to understand, what is the intention or the supportable kind of middle ground, common ground that you're aligned to. We'll want to reach out to you in October and make sure the language we're crafting is on the right track.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Harrison, can you go back that slide again?
Sure.
One more. So I think it's important that we have extended this to, and it talks about, the county, but we're going to obviously rely on each and every one of you to take back this plan to obviously go through your initiatives as well. So it's not just limited. The reason we extended this whole process is to allow you the opportunity to bring this information back, to have the input from your community, have input from your council, and do that. So this is, I think it's decisive to say it's Lee County as well as all the members here. I just thought that was important. That slide didn't say it all.
Yeah. Thanks for that
Sure.
addition. So we obviously we worked a lot with you. We had the one-on-ones that were mentioned. We received a voluminous amount of feedback as we expected and hoped for. We did provide a summary of that that document, it's, upwards of, I think, 20 pages. It's not everything. It couldn't be all inclusive. But we did want to give you a summary of what we had been hearing so that if there are initiatives that are particularly important to you, you'd be able to see what some of the feedback looked like. And certainly we're open and willing to take more. But that's what we received at this time. And we also used a lens to see of the feedback we received, what's transformative. Sometimes the feedback was very easily resolved. And of course, we'll integrate that. But if there were comments that were truly transformative to the initiative, we really wanted to outpoint that. So as you look through that document, that's the meaning of it. So, just to put a fine point on it, we worked with the branches, provided initial iterations of initiatives to review and provide feedback. We have that feedback. There's the meetings we had, the one-on-ones, and then of course we met with the county and the municipalities, and are continuing to meet really with RTF members and the county municipalities, as was mentioned, just to make sure that we're really, having an active conversation about the content. If we were to summarize the kind of feedback that we have been receiving to date, it would fit mostly into these 8 buckets. It further defined initiative descriptions and considerations, allowed for jurisdictional differences and prioritization. Some of the feedback was around, the uniqueness of communities and needing to have a different approach discussed. Initiatives requiring a regional approach. So we received feedback that was about what is the vision for the entire region. We received a lot of recommendations for additional partners. So a lot of you had feedback that said, hey, you've outlined 6 or 7, but you really need 8, 9, 10 community partners at the table for this initiative. We've got a lot of technical details and implications for feasibility. Obviously, a wealth of information about current county and municipal work that is very important to include. A lot of considerations related to vulnerable populations. So a lot of the initiatives that had populations mentioned, other vulnerable populations were mentioned as needing special consideration. And then finally, recommendations to realign or consolidate initiatives, which we're going to go over at length.
So just to give you an example of how this looks in your spreadsheet so that you feel oriented to it. So up here is some of the feedback for hardened critical facilities, which is infrastructure's 9th initiative. And you can see the columns are set up throughout with the branch feedback, the RTF and staff member feedback, and then the county and municipality feedback. So as you're looking at that, this is just an example for you so that you understand what is in that that spreadsheet that you have. And again, those are summaries. It's not including verbatim every piece of feedback. It is focused on the things that may reshape or change the initiative to some extent based on feedback. That transformative sort of feedback that Harrison was mentioning.
So in this work, and a lot of that feedback I think was positive. So if I had to characterize a lot of the interactions we had, it's right track, but additions and reshaping and considerations added. But a lot of it reflected that this is the right track. So we're very encouraged that this work is going to culminate in a plan that's pretty powerful. In the work that we've had so far, there are some emerging themes and interconnections, which, to your point, Mayor McLean, we are looking at potential consolidations of initiatives, and we want to talk a little bit about the logic there, and then we want to have a discussion with you about some decisions that might need to happen about that. So one bit of context for this plan, which is framed as a long-term recovery and resilience plan, we think about resilience investments as doing 2 things: measurably and significantly improving a community's ability to withstand or recover from a disaster. So that's really where the rubber meets the road for recovery, right? We want to make sure that the next disaster that rolls through here, the next hurricane that rolls through here, this community is even better able to withstand and recover. We also want to look for opportunities to support measurable improvements in reducing community stressors, which so often are impacted by a storm and make the experience of a storm or a disaster worse, right? So these are existing problems. I think one that's been mentioned by community at length was the affordable or attainable workforce housing pressures as a place where when you have a disaster, that existing stress is worsened. And so we want to look for opportunities to do both things for a smart investment.
So the idea here is to get you thinking about how we can make initiatives more powerful. And we did talk about these emerging themes, and the branch members have been looking at those too. So often when you're looking through this, if we're talking about consolidation, the branch members may have said this would be more powerful if it was consolidated with this other initiative. But we also don't want to go take that too far, right? So there have been situations where we've also talked about consolidating and then decided, no, that would take away some of the power of that initiative if it is, too far combined with something else. And so we'll be going through some of those opportunities to discuss those today, just to kind of get you in the practice of going through them as we go from the next several weeks. But to identify patterns and goals across branches that align to remove sector silos and increase overall support. So this idea that like, just because it came up in the infrastructure branch doesn't mean it has to live as an infrastructure initiative. It may be better combined with other things. Combining objectives of cross-sector strategies to develop smart, efficient implementation recommendations. So a lot of these things require a lot of different sectors and folks to be at the table. And we have to be thinking about how we strategize around that when we're developing these initiatives. And then also enhancing collaboration to optimize resources. This is obviously key. The ability to think about strategically big enough to make sure that we're not missing opportunities, but specific enough that we feel comfortable to move forward with these, and looking at ways that we can really address the issue of what happens with the next disaster, right? Not just thinking about how we recover and put things back from Ian, but also what are the vulnerabilities that we identified, and if something came in on different track or some other nature of an event happened, how do we make sure that we've thought big enough to be sure that we're thinking about the long-term resilience of our community?
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Tessa, this compiled list is excellent for us to take a real deep dive in, and I think that's what we will be able to do in October. And I just want to, my hopes that we are going to be looking at these and saying, are these feasibly actionable versus are they something that can't be done based on the different locations, the different codes, everything that we have. So I think when I'm reading these, I think so many of them are excellent, but to make sure they're actionable items that we can move forward on, I think is going to be very important.
And recognizing that not everything is going to fit everywhere. Something may be the right solution for Lehigh and not the right solution for Fort Myers Beach. And I think that that's the power of the regional approach.
So to this point, we just want to point out that there are some pretty powerful themes coming across in the work with you and stakeholders. And we want to recognize that those themes constitute perhaps larger visions that incorporate the work of multiple branches. So if I think about attainable and resilient housing, there may be issues that touch on elements of infrastructure and what the work of the infrastructure branch has touched on, or the economic recovery branch has touched on. This is just to say that we're looking for these kinds of interconnections and thinking that way. And we really want to be, I think, over the next month or two, understanding what are the chapters of the plan going to look like. They may not be termed around 8 siloed areas. In fact, I think, to the point of looking at other plans, Council Member Holly, I think a lot of other plans will reflect that there's some really deep thinking about what are the interconnections that are bigger than the traditional silos. So we are looking for those here, and here's some of the ones we see kind of coming up that we're kind of noting and thinking about.
Good.
Sorry, but not sorry. Question for you, because, I think that we have discussed economic recovery. Do you see that as falling in another one of your 4 circles? Because that's an emerging theme that I think over and over again. I know it's a very complex one, but I think is a vitally important one that we need to be addressing somewhere on its own.
So that is a great point. And I think what the economic recovery branch has realized is that economic recovery is dependent on all those other things. And so almost everything that the economic recovery branch has suggested, actually the implementation would fall in another area. So you'll see a lot of it, of stamps of approval from the economic recovery branch on things throughout all of the other branches. There are a few things that are very specific to economic recovery, and those would fall under the supporting business and workforce. But otherwise, the economic recovery branch is very concerned about transportation. They're very concerned about housing. They're very concerned about this community resilience idea and the way that businesses fit into that. So I think that you'll see this, it becomes difficult to separate it out because it is so dependent on a really well-functioning, resilient community overall.
But what that does not mean is that the content goes away or is minimized. And I think that's a really important point, is that we're nowhere in consolidation does it mean that the language would be shortened or made briefer, or that the approach would be any less powerful. It just means that in terms of where it lands, it's being tied to even other codependent issues or subject areas.
Yeah.
It almost seems like the emerging themes is economic recovery.
Right.
Because when you look at what we are in, what we're going in through, economic recovery is the driving force of everything that we're doing here. So maybe that's the center of the circle, because it does tie to absolutely everything that we're discussing.
Good point. I just think that until we start to address some of these major issues of housing and infrastructure, they're going to be the driving factor to economic recovery. Again, I use Sanibel as an example because I was there for so long. But until the condos come back, the resorts come back, those types of things. So whatever we can do to accelerate that process, because we could have any type of support we want for economic recovery, but I agree with your circles. There's so many pieces of this that are instrumental and really essential that drive economic recovery, because honestly, it's the old chicken and egg. I'm a retailer. I want to open up. What's the development? What's it look like in 24, 25, 26? How do we do that? And we're also trying to make sure we keep this economic in mind. And we've talked about this is in the HUD opportunity, where probably the first initiative and the First Amendment will be about this as well. So I think it's overlapping as much as they're two separate things. What we're doing here and the HUD initiative, they'll certainly overlap. And I think the economic recovery just is so complex. I don't know that I understand Councilwoman Smith's point, but I also think, what is paramount is that it just really evolves into each area. It really does. It's essential. Natural resources is essential to economic recovery.
Yep. And you see that in the comments that the economic recovery branch have made over time. I mean, and in fact, we'll talk about a natural resources initiative here today that came from the economic recovery branch. I think our ability to talk about these four circles in terms of economic recovery really expands our opportunities for funding and expands the way we think about some of these issues that some people might think, oh, well, I'm not sure that that's a big deal for recovery, but actually it is, because it has an economic impact too. The more we can think like this, that these pieces are critical to the overall economic recovery of our region, I think the more opportunities that open up for us. All right, so let's give it a go. All right, we're going to go through and see how it feels to look at the potential consolidation of an initiative. And we're starting out here with cultural resources. This has been one where I think it's really important to recognize that one of the key areas that cultural resources rose to the top when it came to this work in developing the recovery and resilience plan is that a lot of our cultural resource assets in the community turned into emergency response places for our community members to go to. They were helping to distribute food. They were in some cases, debris was put on their site. They were playing a role well beyond what we consider the most logical thing that our cultural resources typically do in our community. The other piece of this is the opportunity So that's that connecting with community. They do that all the time. People value cultural resources. They go to them to feel a part of the community. And so that's where you see that CR2 connecting with the community. And it suggests coordinating cultural and artistic networks and creating new opportunities for the community to connect and promote local arts and culture. And then the other one is number 8, which is the cultural and arts working group. And it suggested having a regional cultural and arts group that advises the individual municipalities in addition to the county on activities related to cultural resources. And the idea here was to think about, should these two be consolidated? Could we consolidate both cultural resources initiatives into one, creating a regional cultural and arts group that promotes local arts within the communities and advises the county and municipal activities, including on these ways to connect with the community in blue skies and, in gray skies and after. So the idea here is for you all to sort of think through, how do you feel about this? Do you think that, based on what you know post-storm and now a year after the storm, what do you see the area doing in terms of the ability to support arts and cultural organizations? Is there value in working across jurisdictions in this area? What are your thoughts?
Well, I would look to each of our jurisdictions to see what type of facilities that we have that turn into whether a blue sky or a gray sky. When I look at the county, a lot of the facilities that you use are county facilities. The facilities that we use at our rec centers, or those that do have a rec center, what you have in each of your municipalities that you would be using, and if those would cross over or compete in an aftermath situation. And I think that would fall under this conversation, would it not?
Yeah, definitely thinking about how do we coordinate with those facilities post or pre and post storm event is one aspect of this. Yes.
And I will tell you, for us, and I think this ties right into it, Big Arts has become our city hall. So we have really, and I'm not sure there's any funding that's going towards Big Arts for what their costs have been as they house the city of Sanibel. I mean, we're definitely contributing to that. We have a partnership with them that's a little bit different. We own the land, they own the building. So a lot of complexities on that, but I think that's a great example of how we needed that facility to function as a city for all of our meetings. With that, I'll defer to the county manager.
Another aspect of this is the idea, we talk about diversifying the economy, right? When the beaches are down, our arts and cultural resources become another opportunity for folks to have something to do when they come here, another draw. And this idea of having a cultural and arts working group that's focused on that portion of the cultural resources that is part of economic recovery, that's, potentially something that I think could be part of this as well. Just to put that out there for you to think about. When we think about consolidating, what are all the ways that these ideas can help us with our resilience over time?
County manager, as a member of TDC, with the funding that we go through for our marketing, I mean, that's what we have been trying to do in this, through COVID, through the storm, is bringing people, and how can we help those organizations. Now, a lot of that does have to go to nonprofits only. So maybe there is a consideration, not through TDC dollars, because that's set up specifically, but possibly there is some sort of a consideration, because you're right. We want to have those activities that just help our communities flourish at a time when we need to gather, connect, and that's been a great resource. So thank you for bringing that forward.
I look at those two as, so I think coordinating those two can help clarity, because it seems like a little bit of a duplication. It's you can talk about a lot, but I think you can combine it. But I when you combine it to CR whatever it's going to be, I think at least for a while we should continue to reference CR 02 and 08.
Yep.
You get a hierarchy of those two joined together, and those two just stay. In this particular case, the wording could be pretty simple, I think, to
Mhm.
combine those in there.
Yes, and we've talked, the branches were pretty adamant that they wanted to track uh, the origin of consolidated initiatives to make sure that nothing was left out.
I agree 100%.
Yep. Okay, we did it. Let's try another one.
Okay, so in the area of housing, and this I think also connects to the earlier conversation, which I think you anticipated. So here is two initiatives. One, HO9 finance program suggesting developing financing programs to assist with the construction and purchase of homes. And H12, home ownership counseling. We know there are a number of different programs and opportunities around home ownership counseling and related issues. There's a suggest to increase and expand home ownership counseling services and scope. So what can be the way in which to potentially consider whether those things are best unified? We have a recommendation currently, which is to consolidate them into an initiative that would market and make more accessible repair, recovery, and purchasing assistance programs at both the local and state level. There's a lot out there. And if you're a consumer trying to navigate that, it can be very difficult. And so we know the county has investments in helping people go through that process. And there's perhaps an opportunity to even think about how to augment or upgrade those services currently so that you have kind of maybe one-stop shopping or a larger clearinghouse. But would turn to you to see if either these things need to be kept separate, if any of the comments, Mayor Veach, that you made earlier play into this or you're thinking on this. Love to hear that.
Well, one thing when I look at the HO9 about coming up with financing programs, one thing a lot of my constituents have told me about is a story where they're dealing with their bank, they're dealing with FEMA, they're dealing with the SBA. And when they get more money from one place, they get less from somewhere else. It's like there's a cap. The SBA will take money away from their loan if they get more money from FEMA. So wading into that finance program, I think it'd be tricky, especially if people are already looking at money from other entities like the SBA. It may just be, it may be counterproductive.
So I look at Habitat for Humanity. I think they have a great program that does combine both of those issues. For a lot of people, it's not the amount of money they make, it's how they manage the money they make or the money they have. So I see them being combined.
All right. So we're saying combine.
Well, just a comment on that, because there is so many agencies out there, both finance and in counseling. What I think combining these makes sense, which is the initial question. And I don't want to get into too much of how you implement it, but if we clarify this initiative in later in this process, then we will identify what's the best way for us to accomplish the objective here. And it could be HUD, it could be other areas. So, sometimes I kind of look at this process and say, are we going to be responsible for this? And I'm saying, no, let's use the right people that have already exist and just highlight to our citizens what's available for you.
Yeah.
And maybe not saying we don't do a good job in that already, but make sure it's highlighted.
I think that's a really great point. And I think, the idea that these priorities would exist, create opportunities for entities well beyond what you all are responsible for to be able to potentially seek funding, to be able to start to implement some of these things, even on small scale. I think that that's really important. I mean, we already know just with Collaboratory alone, our donors have started to look at just the emerging issues and have said, oh, we might want to be part of that, or we might be able to use funds for that. So the opportunity that this creates is not just the responsibility of you all. It creates an opportunity for others to partner. And I just wanted, and I want to make sure we're putting an exclamation point on that, because it opens up opportunities for others who are doing this work to be able to partner with you in achieving the goals. All right. So housing and mental health have been the two top issues that we've heard over and over again post Ian. I think we can all agree that those issues existed before, and this is where that resilience concept comes in. This idea that the things that were already very stressed become the hardest hit after a disaster. And so the idea here is to consolidate the mental health and behavioral investments on all fronts while acknowledging that the planned initial investment of while acknowledging that there has been a planned initial investment of disaster funds in this area. The idea being here that the $10 million that have already been invested or have been designated for mental health services probably aren't going to solve our problem, right? And so it's going to take more than that. So how can we leverage this plan to seek additional mental health resources and think about how the crisis intervention centers play a role in that, right? So I think what the health and social services branch was thinking here is mental health care, behavioral health care is a continuum. Crisis is one part. We don't want to have to use that if we don't have to. We want to be able to use the right level of care and hopefully intervene earlier so that we don't have a crisis. But we know that we don't have enough mental health services for the need in our community. We felt that really, really very acutely after the storm. And so does it benefit us to consolidate these things together? Suggesting that accessible mental health resources to the community also include the crisis intervention resources that exist or that need to be grown. Thoughts on that?
I think that you've brought it forward as a recommendation. So the branches that you've worked with have also felt like this is probably a crossover. I would say, what would be the disadvantage? These two seem to be tied together. And I think what we want to do is consolidate as much as we can to cover what should be, instead of diluting something, making it more comprehensive under one branch initiative.
Thank you. Any other feedback on this?
No, I think that's great. And I thank the branches. It's always helpful, not only having an opportunity to sit or review their message, because it really does help in this process to understand what you're doing. And I do think, as essential as our comments are, those branch people are really looking at this to try to find ways for us to consolidate. And I really appreciate the efforts, but thank you.
Yeah.
I'm in support of making that also. I guess maybe just for administration on this meeting, as opposed to looking for support for the consolidation, has anybody got a problem maybe of consolidating these? I'd like to hear if there are issues with this. I think it makes sense to me, but it may not to other folks. So.
Yeah.
I just sort of have a question. Yes, they're definitely related. There's no doubt about that. But funding for the two, I mean, the mental health part is so underfunded. I don't know if we maybe should really focus on keeping that separate. I don't know. I mean, that's just a question. Why they're related, I'd hate to see it get split too many ways or something like that. I mean, you were talking about that earlier. Some of them just may not need to stand alone.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think potentially it could go either way, right? I think one thing we have to make sure is that we understand that crisis intervention, if we combine them, and it's true, but that crisis intervention centers are part of a mental health continuum of care. And we desperately needed more beds in crisis intervention centers before Ian. We certainly needed them post Ian. It took a very long time to get that back open. But so what are the opportunities to expand those? But no matter what, we have to recognize that those two things do go together. The question is, do they stay separate because there's some opportunity to leverage something by keeping them separate?
Chris, you had your hand up.
I think what we're trying to do is come up with some strategic objectives here. And we're going to learn as we go through the process, how to refine those objectives based upon, what we can find in terms of funding sources, what the capabilities are of the staffs within the cities and within the county and with the other taxing districts and so forth. I would be favored to try to consolidate as much as we can, because in my mind, that keeps a strategic plan simpler, easier to understand as a selling tool when we're trying to convince somebody that we've got our act together in terms of a resiliency plan and outline what we want to do. Because we're going to do different types of missions in terms of going after solutions.
Yeah.
We're not just, this is not a static process. So, I just don't want us to get too hung up with fine tuning the wording of all this. I would rather, let's get some broad objectives and then let's start going tactical as to how we're going to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to what Mayor McLean said in the last initiative combining HO 9 and H12. It's how that this is our header, but then it's how we educate and have the subgroups underneath that to make sure that all the resources are there and defined.
Yeah.
And I think that, that's for us to get into the weeds in. So I think this is very similar to the last initiative that we discussed on consolidation.
So I think I appreciate all the feedback, and it does get difficult when you worry about one part being left out, right? I think the key here is to recognize that when we consolidate these, we have to be really intentional about not just making like adding crisis intervention centers as one little comma in a list, right? But instead to express that fully and what its intent was, so that if there's funding specifically for crisis intervention centers, that combined initiative would not prevent us from just seeking that part of a larger continuum of care. So I think we can accomplish those things by combining them, but I think also looking at what funding, one thing we might want to look at before we fully combine them would be to see, is there some funding mechanism that suggests that keeping them separate would be of value?
My sense is that it does work to combine them on that front. But I also think it's a key consideration is that we tell this story across a continuum of need and make sure that the funding addresses each part of that continuum and tells that story correctly. I think that's a possible route.
Great.
But Tess, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's really essential that we do as much as we can to combine, but it does speak volumes that inside of crisis intervention will certainly be mental health. I don't think we'll lose the flavor of the opportunities underneath it. And from what, certainly paying attention to these, it seems like there'll be broad enough opportunities to look for crisis intervention and then address some of those silos underneath it.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chris.
Yeah, just one other point. The funding's going to change over time as the funding agencies have different priorities or refine their own priorities. So just because one thing may not be funded in 24, you might find it funded in 25. And we want, again, it's not a static process.
Yep.
We need to have enough flexibility in our objectives that we can adjust as funding becomes available.
Yep. Great point. Thank you.
Very good. Great. So moving to resilient communications, and which one of these, this is actually an attempt to consider consolidating initiatives across 3 different branches. So we have an initiative in infrastructure, resilient communications. This really looks at the infrastructure in communications. A lot of the story of Hurricane Ian touched on communications related issues or difficulties and what would be the chance to enhance or upgrade infrastructure. Initiative out of planning and capacity looked at communication capabilities. A lot of this initiative was really looking at the connectivity points with community. If you want to think about what was the messaging to community that happened and how effective could the community be communicated with. So on one hand, in infrastructure, actually thinking about the infrastructure communication, in planning capacity, thinking about the connection to community and the ability to communicate and message. And then lastly, an area out of economic recovery around technological advancements. So the overall need to have more broadband in community is, obviously a key economic, priority. And so the nexus of these three things is interesting, and we wanted to, this body to consider what should be the shape going forward. And I'll mention that in this case, I don't know that there was consensus on this across the branches. So the different branches had differing perspectives. So we definitely wanted to bring it to the attention of this body to consider what your thoughts would be.
Chris?
I chair I shouldn't say I chair. I'm the liaison from our council to the Technology Committee of the City of Bonita Springs. And I would find it difficult, and I think the Technology Committee would find it difficult if we separated all this, because they're all interrelated. You have to look at what the vendors are doing with 5G. You have to look at what the needs are for towers. You have to look at, where we're going with broadband capacity and so forth. So, I don't know how you carve that up into buckets that don't talk to each other. I would say it all goes into one bucket.
Any other comments?
So I'm sorry, are you saying that you would not suggest combining those, or you would? Okay, thank you. Okay.
I would just comment that I do see a little separation between building like a resilient hub with very resilient communications in an emergency, and then adding communications to different communities. Seems like maybe there's two different criteria there. One is more about a specific location for emergency use for, first responders and whatnot. The other is more about spreading around the community. And I'm not sure if there's enough overlap to combine them in my mind.
Don't know if there are other thoughts. I think I recognize the point you're making. I would say that one interesting leverage point on the financing side is that the overall desire to make communities more connected can be thought of as a way to also pull in funding that does that, but also makes the community more resilient and increases the communication capability. So there is at least that tie that I think that bigger conversation around access can be leveraged in favor of making resilience happen effectively. But the reason you stated, of course, is also a consideration.
Any other thoughts?
Mr. Chair. I kind of agree that, when you look at these three topics, just like some of the other topics that we've looked at, if this had a heading of communications initiatives, we know that means several different things. I think it's important when we go through this process. My understanding is that, we'll pretty much have a heading, and then we'll have some subheadings or silos underneath of those. And I think that's important to make sure that that's my understanding how we're going to do that, because all three of these items are communications related. So if we're trying to streamline the process and don't have as much redundancy in our finished product, then to me, I would agree that the initial heading would be communications initiatives. And that means many things. That means blue skies, that means gray skies, that means expanding the infrastructure in our communities, but it all falls under, for me anyway, communication initiatives. So as long as we're going to have those subsections where we can break out some of these elements, I think if we have it in one spot in the plan where we can, we have a title of a communications initiatives, and there could be many subtitles underneath that. As long as we're doing it in that fashion, I think combining it is a smart way to go.
Yeah, great. And that's a great point and perspective, because I think that's where you see the different branches have been doing this work, right?
Right.
But we have a plan that had the silos. That would be a problem, because we'd have these three things in three different parts of the plan. And so it really does make sense to begin to think bigger and integrate. So I definitely appreciate those comments.
And I think also, and I just got the nod from the chair, this is a living document. And to be as, we've all gone through our strategic planning in probably all of our agencies, and this is how we do it. You know, you have everything and then you start filtering it down. But if this living document continues to change, probably over the years, if we have one heading and then things are going to go away, things are going to be added. I'm going to just keep going back to Mayor McLean's points that it's the subgroups that are going to define and change, but it's the main factor that communications is not going to change.
So I think what I'm hearing is that there's enough commonality, obviously, in this regard. I couldn't agree with both Chris and Holly's points. So this is going to evolve. I mean, just yesterday, it was an interesting theory that came up, and Kevin Guthrie had indicated that FEMA hasn't necessarily reimbursed us all, and they're going to be there. So it's going to constantly come up with issues that are the crisis issue, if you will, and you'll see that type of intervention. You'll see that. So I think it's important that we do combine them. I think there's enough commonality that I'm hearing across the table, and I think that we won't lose, and we'll have emphasis on the subsections underneath it. And the opportunities may be easy in one year and more challenging in the next year. But I think there'll be different opportunities. So I think the more we can agree that there's enough commonality to do that and not lose what the subsection is, we're fine.
And, you know, this issue has been raised a couple of times, and I think there was also some different perspectives among the branch members on this. So that's why we're bringing this one forward. So in infrastructure, there is currently an initiative called Diversify Sheltering Strategy. And this speaks to the idea that perhaps it would be good to have a larger number of shelters that are not necessarily serving the function of a school building as well. And then also in infrastructure, there's a desire to harden and upgrade sheltering facilities. So thinking about the power redundancy and whether the HVAC system is able to function at full capacity during the use of the facility as a shelter. And then lastly, in health and social services, sheltering strategies for vulnerable populations, understanding that there are shelters that are designated for some special needs, but then there are obviously even general shelters have people come to them that have a wide variety of needs, health needs that have implications for the power that's needed on site, have implications for the sensitivity of certain populations to be comfortable and safe in an environment, thinking about those who may be struggling with, conditions around autism and other areas. But really thinking about these three different ways of sheltering and whether they need to be combined into one approach or whether they belong in, or some of them are so unique that they need to be somehow separate. And again, there were differing opinions, so just wanted to hear the opinions of this body.
But I'm sensing a theme here.
Mhm.
You're bringing these recommendations to us. You're the expert, and if we can limit what we have and then have the subgroups, I see this as your recommendation, and it's sheltering. That's the overall theme, and then how we take it under, as Mayor Gunter said, as Mayor McLean said, that's when the development happens and it changes. So unless you're telling us of a downside, but I don't think you'd be bringing these forward if you felt there was a downside to combining these areas.
Jenna?
I agree with Councilwoman Smith, and I think when we get into the meat of each of these, we'll be intuitively focused to make sure nothing gets lost in the language. But you all have been doing a fantastic job so far. I see this as Tessa, when you talked about earlier, when you combine, that can help make something more important or powerful. But I see putting the sheltering strategies for vulnerable populations under the overall sheltering strategy as giving that a greater emphasis and focusing more on that need, which is a huge need in our community. So I think this is a great combination.
Yeah, and I think that just to kind of piggyback on Councilwoman Smith's concept, I mean, having a little bit more in-depth briefing, I know that your recommendations are these recommendations, and I know that you're suggesting to combine them. So I think I don't want to say it's assumed, but it's assumed that these are your recommendations.
We actually put all three of those forward and under the school district as one. But they went to different branches and they came from different branches type things. But that was sort of our original intention. So I'm sure there's other proposals that other people have put out there from the city, and it went to here, and here in different branches. So they are overlapping. So, but yeah, definitely they should be combined.
Truncate the rest. So hearing the overall understanding that this process seems to be the right one and the recommendations that we're putting forward are good ones, let's maybe truncate the rest of this a piece where we can just show you the recommendation and maybe take your approval of it, in a more quick fashion. I think really quickly then. if you
Yep.
wanna-
So the last one, this is actually the last one. So this is the natural resources one that I mentioned to you earlier. This did come from economic recovery initially, and it's this idea that and they've been very clear that the natural environment is a huge economic driver for the region, and they view the combining of these two as an opportunity to create greater access to resources while protecting their important role in the region's resilience where it makes sense. So we know that there may be opportunities to increase access to natural resources while also protecting them, given the important role that they play in the long-term resilience, but also in the economy. And so the recommendation was to combine these two.
Hearing no objections.
My only question is that you're incorporate the differences in increasing access, and I'm reading these for the first time. So the second one, you're talking about economic impact. So I would hope that however you categorize it, you use both of those, because increasing access and economic impact are two very different themes.
Yes.
Great. So noted. There actually is one more.
Oh,
And this one
sorry.
is
I
important. I am going to take a second
messed
on this
up.
one because this one is a pretty key one, and there was a lot of conversation around this and different perspectives. So I definitely want to take a moment with this. So we have in health and social services, hardening healthcare facilities, and we have also in health and social services, critical facilities, and we have in infrastructure, hardening critical facilities. I think some of that is clearly alignable. But just maybe I'll focus on the specific question of healthcare facilities and facilities in a broader fashion. It was pointed out that in the case of healthcare, regulations and laws are different, standards are different, sometimes the players are different, and the funding is different. And that maybe there's a question around the experience of this community with the centrality of impact on healthcare. Maybe this is an area where we want to think that they might need to be kept separate. That was the conversation that was actively had. I don't know that we had a strong recommendation. I think, I'll be honest, personally, I was leaning toward, I want to be really sensitive to the idea of not over combining here. But I wanted to hear perspectives based on your experiences of Ian and your community needs.
I wish we had healthcare here at the table today. Unfortunately, I don't think we do.
So maybe it's
And-
tabled. Maybe.
And I would request a table because I think this is a big chunk on this one.
Okay.
And I'd like to get some input from those healthcare experts. And before I would make a suggestion on that.
So we'll table this conversation until we have.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I did have the opportunity to interact with David, and both David and David Collins and Mr. Klein weren't available. So I'd love to have their input. I agree.
Yeah, just one comment on, there are many legs to this, and different interests and different ways to approach it. Really, when you look at combining all of these, we've talked about funding and how we actually implement the improvements. So when I look at this, I don't see a lot of different, as long as we don't lose each of these initiatives. when I look at this, we're all pretty busy people doing our roles. I like a little simplification as long as that doesn't, some of the topics don't get lost in the creation of consolidation. So, but if we want further discussion, I'm good with that. But I like the overall look of it. It's pretty good.
You know, my comments is, you know, they probably align with Councilwoman Smith. You know, the health component is such a key ingredient in our recovery, and I really would want the opportunity. I've interacted a lot, you know, with David Collins, and I certainly would like his voice, and I just think it's too big. I look at this as you know, we've combined 2, we've combined 3, now we're combining 4. And again, they're just such an important element. So I think it's great to just table it.
Great. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, so that really concludes the conversation we wanted to have with you. Thank you so much for those recommendations and approving those recommendations that will help us craft the initiatives going forward. The projects that you're out, you know, you've submitted and projects that you're still considering to submit in this process would align to the headlines, would align to those kind of initiative strategic objectives. So the headlines are important. So really appreciate your help with that. Currently, the RTF requested to reschedule the October meeting due to a conflict with a large jurisdictional event. That meeting, I believe, was scheduled for October 27th. We're recommending then to, you know, cancel that meeting and reconvene in November, early November, to discuss draft initiatives. So we really think it's effective and maybe a happy accident to have that October be completely open to working with you and your teams and utilizing your time that way, and not having the meeting in October, and then moving forward with in November, where we have the upgraded, redrafted initiatives.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. You know, what I've heard loudly and clearly is there's a lot of information here to digest. The other thing that I would stress, you know, I have an inside benefit of understanding the pieces and get briefed probably a little bit more thoroughly, but all the branches certainly have YouTubes and there's opportunity. So as you reflect and start to go through this with your team, your council, feel free to go and look at those branches and go look at the YouTube and what their discussions were, the minutes that are there. And if we could help give you any additional information, feel free to ask us. You know, sometimes when you're sitting in a chair like mine, I might take too much for granted that you all are traveling at the same speed. This has been a consuming project, and I know you all have everything else to do, but there are a lot of tools available as you're going through this. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to catch our breath. We do have some relief from February. It gives us an opportunity, and as questions come in, so in the early part of November, we could have a really substantive meeting.
Okay.
Everybody okay with that?
Chair, I have
Thank
one
you.
question on the initiatives for just, I know that we had all received the Dropbox with all of the initiatives and the breakdown of those. And on the economic recovery, I know that I had emailed because it was not, the numbers like 1, 3, 7, a little bit inconsistent. And all the others, I do not believe I've gotten the correct one. So I just wanted to follow up to make sure that we're all given that. Those might be all that there were, and it was just not numbered correctly. So just, I'd request that we get that. So in case there was something that we missed, that we have that information.
Yeah, thanks for that. We looked into that. I think there was just a little bit of an issue with needing to update the link to the Dropbox you're mentioning.
Okay.
And we've done that now. So we'll work with you to just make sure you have the updated, access.
I knew you would.
To the-
Thank you.
Great.
Do we have a date in November that we could maybe pencil in at this point?
I would leave that to.
My bad. No, I mean, we don't right now. I mean, I certainly, I don't know if everyone has their calendar ability to pull out dates, but, you know, perhaps you can go back, look at your calendars and, we'll throw out half a dozen dates that might look. It seems like Friday seems to be a good time, but I don't know if Friday in the early part of the month, because that's what this is suggesting. I know many of us have meetings on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So those are always challenging, especially if we're looking at the beginning part of the month. So It just seems like Friday is clearer because most of us have council meetings Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. We're doing the early part of the month.
November 3rd is Horizon Council. I know that we've kind of come after Horizon Council many times.
Yep.
So that's the one. And then Veterans Day is the 10th. And then the day after Thanksgiving is the 24th.
Yeah, no, I
So-
think our
17th.
objective is certainly
Yeah.
to try to get it in the
I'm
first
gone
15
17th.
days.
But I'm gone the week of, I'm in DC from the 13th to the 17th, but November 3rd after the Horizon.
Yeah, I think the objective is to try to get it in before the 15th, so we'll try to do it the 1st to the 10th. Throw out some dates. It's early. We want to do that. We want to keep this moving as well. So you may not have many alternatives, but we'll try to work within the calendar. I know everyone else is busy, and just FYI, we can certainly get you information on the branches. I don't know that what I said before is 100% accurate, that they're recorded. So I've certainly been reading a lot of the minutes associated with them, but thank you.
Great. Okay,
Any
so
other-
does that close out the discussion among RTF members? Wonderful. We'll move to public comment.
Look to public comment.
Before you go to public comment, because we don't come back again. So I would just like to say that, one, I want to thank Kevin for his leadership in this. I appreciate your comments as you open it up. I know you've put a lot of effort in here, as we all have. We've been doing this for 7 months, and, quite frankly, today seemed like we made some decisions. I mean, prior to today, we've been discussions and all that are great, but I like to see actions. And it looks like with all the combined efforts that Hagerty has made, we're at a point where this group seems like now we're going to be interacting and making some decisions that may impact how we address these issues going into the next few years. So I thought this was a great meeting for us. We made some progress, and that's a positive thing in my mind. So thank you for your leadership.
No problem. Yeah, I think it's important to, let's understand where we are and where we need to go. And I think we're going to have to pivot, and that's a word I've used too much, but we're going to have to pivot and adjust as funding streams become available, even as administrations change from, year to year. I mean, we've been blessed working with a legislative group, a governor that certainly has been very responsive, but we also have to be prepared as things change and opportunities, and where different initiatives may come in up at Tallahassee as we go from one president to another. So we're going to have to be very fluid and pivot on those. So I think that's really important to understand. We'll go to public comment.
Hello, Therese Everly, Lee Health Board of Directors. Thank you, Commissioner Ruane, for your leadership and everything that's happened here today. Unfortunately, David Collins couldn't be here. He wasn't feeling well. I was with him till late afternoon, and let me tell you, he wanted to be here. I wanted to respect the process, so I did not get up to speak. Just as a very involved member, like many of us on the branches, I'm on the Health and Social Service branch. So I really appreciate the incentives that we all worked on aligning, and you supporting the process thus far. This is great progress. I do want to talk about that one that you tabled, and I appreciate that you did do that. Those 4 initiatives, the 2 to the left, came out of our branch, Health and Social Services. So when we were discussing our intent around hardening healthcare facilities was more about our focus on not using the acute care system as a shelter for vulnerable populations, because as people are ill, we need beds freed up and that whole throughput. So we talked about nursing homes and assisted livings and hardening them, so not moving vulnerable populations. So that was kind of the intent of those first 2 buckets. But I will say, as a board member, we are critically in need of assistance with our critical infrastructure, number 1 being our water, so that we don't have to shut down our systems. So thank you, Representative Persons and the other board members that talk about not losing the work that's happened in the branches. Yes, they'll roll up to that bigger piece, but just keeping in mind what the intent of those branches were would be really important. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Fred Forbes, Bonita Springs, Deputy Mayor. First, I want to compliment the members of the task force, Haggerty, Collaboratory, for where we've gotten. I do want to bring up something that I think needs to be added into this. And I'll blame part of the fact that it isn't, is timing. Timing's everything. I submitted, with permission and backing of the city council, an initiative, which was basically two things. Let me talk about the first thing real quick, but the second is more important, I think. That is a need for countywide, for the various cities and maybe different parts of the county, to re-study and come up with a different stormwater event that you design your stormwater systems for. Because right now, most of you don't know it, but you're designing for a 25-year isolated storm. That means the ground is bone dry. We've never had a flood that the ground was bone dry. Gives you a false, because they take credit for water going in the ground. Now, the most important thing, the other part of the initiative was to develop software that could predict accurately flooding in the worst parts of Lee County, including the cities. Bonita Springs has areas of the city that are very flood prone. We, about a month ago, when all this stuff started to shift here, our city went ahead and authorized the guy that has developed so far a very successful modeling of how bad a flood's going to be. He modeled Irma, but unofficially, and he was within a quarter to an inch in most places of where the water, how high it would rise. We went ahead and just authorized him to go ahead and extend that model for the city of Bonita. It really needs to be looked at for either all of Lee County or sections of Lee County that would be very flood prone. Now, the good news is, now we didn't put this into our authorization at the moment, but he can also accurately predict storm surge. The quicker emergency management of Lee County would have information coming from him, they can put out a much more timely warning as to how bad it's going to be. And the way it works, it's like 3 days out, he'll take the best data coming in and model that. That would be the first release. The next day, another release based on new data. Probably then about 6 hours before it's supposed to hit, that would be the most accurate. But the more you can warn the people, and the more the people heed evacuation or go out and harden their business so it doesn't get flooded as bad, the less damage, the less insurance claims, the less stuff that gets in the bay, like all the cars were washing there because people would move their cars. I'm going to submit what I gave to the lady that was from FEMA that was part of Haggerty just added. I'm going to give it to Kevin, and he can get it distributed to whoever. And I'd like to have a meeting with somebody in Haggerty and your other people that are making this decision to see if it's possible to get this added in as an objective or strategy or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia Ellis, Interloop Working Group, Responsible Growth Management. I want to point out just a reminder of the inception, which was a natural disaster. And I really, truly feel like that giving natural resources its due is really central, because we didn't experience initially with inception an economic, cultural, or health emergency. It began with a natural disaster. So I think that we have to honor that. Second of all, I want to point out that this is the opportunity to galvanize a community. And locally, we can look to an example. That example is Bonita Springs. And what we see in Bonita Springs today is in large part a result of Irma. And I really appreciate the mixed income character of Bonita Springs. The fact that the people who live there, many families are Hispanic, are benefiting from an improvement in their quality of life from those investments that came from Irma. Those kids are on their bikes safely, getting around to schools. it's attractive. And I think that is a model. And I appreciate the comments coming out of Fort Myers Beach, because I don't think what we want to see for our community is busing people in from Immokalee to go work at South Seas, which I know happens. And I think from a transportation perspective, that's a good way to approach that. But we don't want to see people pushed out into the margins. And we don't want to see people out in apartment buildings out Alico Road, for instance, with no other options but to live places like Los Palmos to get bused into other parts of the county. We want to have mixed income communities that are natural. Also, wouldn't to say that we still have land use issues that are troubling to me. And I know that people are fired up really all over the county with attacks on their wetlands, attacks on their mangroves, and attacks on the agricultural capacity. We do need to maintain the character of our communities and the diversification. I think it's premature to cancel these branch meetings. I really wanted to come to education and workforce to ask questions about the Section 3 objectives and youth build to make sure that the economic development element is employing those businesses by Section 3 as directed in the CDBGDR, and we're getting those youth build programs to elevate our whole community as intended through federal recovery and investment. I too would like to see the plan outline and the draft initiatives to review from the public perspective, if someone can give me access to those or tell me where I can find them. Thank you for your time.
Other public comment? Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to just address an issue that was brought up last year in legislative session when I had the opportunity to testify at special session, and there seems to be doing that again. The one area that, as a region, I look at that we're somewhat unique and or fractured is water. The legislator looks at water. If this was all Lee County utilities, hardening would be easy. The fact that we are in so many different pieces, in Pine Island, it's Pine Island water, Sanibel's Island water, Benita has their own water facility. And the fact that it's still our responsibility to provide water, potable water to all the citizens of Lee County, but hardening some of those nonprofits should be a consideration. And I know that it's an issue, but, we closed and, can remember very vividly at the EOC making a decision to close the hospital. We need to address our situation when it comes to water and the connectivity, because we all recognize the importance now of transmission lines with, the different plants that we have to obviously process it. But when we have generators, transmission lines, things that break, the hardening of that is really important. It's just that, like, I've had people from Pine Island, no different than Island Water, would like to recognize their responsibility, recognize that we have to provide water to all the citizens, and it shouldn't be an impediment because we have a different structure. Island Water still provides water for the citizens of Sanibel and Captiva. Pine Island does the same. So they do serve an essential structure. And when I looked at the three areas, that we first addressed, which is debris, electric, and water, those challenges, we seem to understand debris. We tackled that. It was a money issue, cut it off. Electric, we tried to work with our providers and tried to bring them along. And I saw they're partnering with FP&L Duke and getting along. The water issue is still an issue, and it's a big issue. And it puts us in a very vulnerable state. So I don't mean to take too much time, but Jenna, I certainly wouldn't mind as a broader initiative. And I know it's something I brought up last year under my testimony. It's just something that we are going to need to address, really desperately need to address the hardening of all water structures. So it's almost like it's Lee County Utilities, because if it was Lee County Utilities, putting in an opportunity and some funding for hardening is a lot easier than a nonprofit trying to put in for their hardening. And I just think that's so essential. So that'll be an objective. The last thing that I want to comment is, we all had the privilege of having Kevin Guthrie here yesterday, and I know each municipality and each entity here is stretching their funding, their cash flow to the nth degree. I can tell you Lee County alone has about $186 million that we've spent and only $52 million reimbursed from FEMA. So we have huge cash flow crunches. We all have lines of credit. We all have other availability. But if the spigot could open up, I know Kevin said he would address it and take care of it. I greatly appreciate that. But I can tell you, having talked to most other municipalities or their financial people, I was at Sanibel yesterday, I talked with Steve Chapel. I talked to Pete Winton. I mean, I can tell you if we're stretched and we had, $700 million worth of reserves to borrow from, I can't imagine that each one of you is on stretched to capacity and beyond capacity. So I know Kevin said he would take care of that, and that's going to be an emergent issue, and I think it's going to come a lot faster. And unfortunately, the 25 million the county got, or some of the silos or pockets of money that the other cities got, aren't adequate enough because cash is just going to run out. It's a concern. Would you like to say something? Yes, sorry.
Mr. Chair, thank you for your comments. I agree. Time is money, and money equals time as well. But I also wanted to, I know I personally invited each of the local jurisdictions, but I wanted to share with everyone the details of our upcoming legislative delegation meeting. So the Lee County Legislative Delegation, which is comprised of the House members and the Senate members who represent a portion of Lee County. We meet annually, and we will be meeting on Monday, October 30th at 9 a.m. at Florida Southwestern State College in the nursing building, room AA-177. If you would like additional information, or if you would like to make a public presentation regarding any policy or fiscal issues or any concerns from the community, you can reach out to me at my office, and I'll share my email. It's jenna.persons@myfloridahouse.gov. And I look forward to hearing from everybody. I know the local jurisdictions have already reached out, but we have a lot to discuss, not only then, because we will be limited on times that for the presentation, since we only have so much time to meet, but I know we will be continuing the conversations up in Tallahassee continuously over the next few months. And I really appreciate all of you who continue to communicate with us, because I know we have needs not only county-wise, but in our particular localities that are incredibly important to the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenna, and I can't thank you enough for your participation throughout the year and being available to us and leading our local delegation. It's essential, and you, as many members, are really a key ingredient to make sure we actually recover.
I just wanted to echo your comments, especially yesterday when we did get a release from the governor's office. And I think the goal of all of this task force, some of us have greater needs than others. And I hope that that is not based on our population, but it is based on our contribution to what we are in greater Southwest Florida. Both Fort Myers Beach, I think you were not on the list yesterday for any of the appropriations asks. Sanibel did receive them, and I think this is an off-the-record conversation. We are grateful for every dollar we have, but we do know no matter what storm hits, someplace it's going to be somewhere else. It's not going to be Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel that were devastated in Irma, and in Charlie, it went to North Fort Myers, and in Irma, it went across to Lehigh. And I think every municipality in the county would say we need to give the greatest help to those that need the greatest help. And then also look at the overall, what they established for the economy. And I know, as you said earlier, Chair, until our economy comes back via our condominiums, that's our revenue. That's Lee County's revenue as well that comes in tax dollars. We need to get those up and running sooner rather than later. And I hope that's considered. And I look forward to following up the conversation. And I thank all of you. And I know, we thank you, but we mean it. And I know our conversations don't start and stop at session. And we'll look forward to sitting down and talking to you more. Thank you. And thank you, Chair, for bringing that up.
No, I appreciate it. Yesterday was just a great day of reflection, and I'd be remiss since my last meeting was at my last part of my district is not to indicate that Pine Island has enormous needs, way beyond anyone's imagination. And I'd encourage anyone to go over there because I don't mean to try to put anyone in any particular order, but it is certainly eye-opening and very emotionally draining as I ended my day yesterday on Pine Island. I can assure you, as someone that represents that area, they're not forgotten. And we will certainly make sure, because each part, whether incorporated or unincorporated, is essential to our recovery. And let's make sure we help all areas of Lee County as they're all going through some really challenging times. The point of my earlier comment about cash flow is if we're big brother, so to speak, at Lee County, and we're feeling the cash crunch, I have more than enough empathy and sympathy for you all. And if anyone knows me, accounting, finance is certainly something I pay a lot more attention to some other things. And I am very concerned about how we continue to evolve and how we're able to address these issues, because SBA has been disappointing, FEMA's been disappointing, and I don't know where we'd be. And I'm going to close these comments without the state of Florida and the assistance we've gotten, because we'd be a county that wouldn't be open today. Thank you.
I do want to chirp in to thank the state, because our revenues are way down. We have a lot of needs, but I think more importantly, it's a great lifeline. It really keeps us functioning when a time when we desperately need to be a functioning government. But in addition, I think that any kind of help is an investment, because right now we're not generating the kind of tax revenue we did, and until that gets fixed, then that money's not going to come in. So the money that you're helping us with, I looked at it as an investment to return the revenue that we generate as quickly as possible.
I'm glad the mayor borrowed my line yesterday and said that it's a hand up, not a handout. But that was a theme I essentially shared with the legislator. And if you just look at sales tax, you'd understand exactly what our contribution is, because it is off the charts because of our inflicted damage. And if for nothing else, I always just remind everyone, if we just reappropriate that in a more direct fashion, I think we're certainly demonstrating that we actually do contribute enormously.
And I think in the state's view, we are a good investment.
But thank you all. I do appreciate you all being here, and I'll call for an adjournment. Thank you.